This video, we're going to talk about the different layers um, in Photoshop and some of the tools and properties of the layers palette. So this is one of my favorite projects from last semester. This student obviously used more than 5 images, but they were clearly having a lot of fun with it, so that's totally cool. So one of the things I want to cover is the naming of your layers, and you can see the student named a bunch of his layers. So all you need to do is double click on a layer and give it a name. So let's say that's that layer right there. Um, so it's pretty easy. Just double click on when it says like layer 1 and you'll get a text field and you can rename your layer. So that's pretty simple. Another thing that you can do with layers is, hold on, put them in groups like these. So if I expand some of these, you can see that this layer, this is in like a folder, and there are a couple of layers within that folder. The cool thing about that is I can turn them on and off. I would think that this little piece of whatever this is on his selfie should also be in there. So I'll use this tool to, I'll zoom in, and that's the gorilla and the kitten. So I think it's this little piece of the cat. So he put it in the cat folder, but it's really part of the gorilla, so I'm gonna just drag it down into the selfie, the gorilla selfie thing. So now when I turn that layer off, the kitten goes away too, so that's cool. You can set the visibility of a bunch of different layers at one time, and when you start with a file that gets a lot of layers, it is helpful to put them in groups. So to create a new group, you would just come here. So I see these dragons are not part of group, and part of the reason is I think he left them out is because they actually have a clipping mask with this space layer. So let me zoom over to one of those. So if I turn off the space layer, that's also going to turn those off. But to show you how the folder thing works, we just click on the folder, it adds a new group. You can click and then shift click to click multiple layers and then just drag them inside of there. So that did ruin our clipping mask group, or the clipping thing, but I'm just going to come in here and I can duplicate that effect by taking a soft edge brush and sort of, oh, why is it like set to dissolve? Just change the brush. Weird, it looks like it's set to dissolve. Oh, this layer is. I'm going to change that back to normal. So you can just kind of recreate that effect. But now I can turn both dragons on and off at the same time. And I can also do things like if I select the layer group, I can globally change their opacity, to both layers instead of changing it, the opacity on both. I can change the effects, the layer blend modes to every layer that is in my group. So it is kind of convenient to use groups to organize and to globally edit some of the properties of your layers. Okay, so next we have layer blend mode. So I'm going to click on this space layer, and you can see that this space layer is set to screen. If I go back to normal blend mode, you can see that's the original photo here. So the student changed that blend mode to screen, which gives it this light look. So just a quick thing, I'm not going to go and explain all of these. One of my favorites is multiply, and what it does is it takes the pixels of that layer and multiplies them with the pixels of the layer or layers behind it. So it gives it this really it darkens it. The opposite of that is screen, which makes the pixels blend and make them lighter than the pixels behind them. Um, Another one I like is overlay, which is almost a combination of the two. So it takes the darks and makes them darker, and the lights and makes them lighter. Um, uh, Difference is gonna give you the opposite, so it's like the negative of that. But just play around with some of these blend modes. And the other thing you would want to play around with, oh, I'm going to go back to screen, is the opacity. So maybe I think that that's still too bright and distracting. I can drop the opacity of that layer. Yeah, and next we have um, layer styles or effects here. So I'm going to go to, let's see, this cat has inner shadow. I don't know if that's obvious enough. So I'm going to take this Jeep here and just take a look at it. So it has a bevel, which probably isn't making much of a difference. It has inner shadow. It's making very slight difference. It probably helped the mask not be so obvious. But I'm going to make a more obvious effect change to some of these. So I'm going to choose let's see, I'll do stroke because that's pretty obvious. So what you can see what it did was add like a border around the whole thing. So we can choose to position that outside the object or inside the object or centered, so it sort of splits the difference with whatever the width is. Um, and like the layers, you can choose your blend mode. So maybe I like that, but I want it to be set to um, overlay or something, so you can see that it's not quite, it's not white anymore. It's blending with the pixels behind it. Bump it up and do outside. There are a lot of layer styles. I can do gradient overlay is another good one. So this is also set to overlay. If I just do it to normal, and it's set to 87%, but you can see, so you can see this gradient has been applied. It's this orange to purple. I can change that to any of these preset ones that are here. This one is going to be foreground color to transparent. This is foreground color to background color, so those will change depending on what you have. But you can actually also set your own. So you can take maybe one of these to start and say, well, I like this one, I like the orange, but I want this to be a green. So you can, let me move this up, you can see, so you can click on this point here and then click on the color and change it to whatever you want. And say OK. Like everything else, you also have a blend mode applied to it. So this is now normal. We saw that. So if I change it to overlay, it's going to just average those things out, make it brighter or darker. That actually looks pretty cool. I think I might keep that one, but maybe I decided I don't want that stroke, so I can turn that off and I can say OK to that. So when I do that, underneath my image is actually, I applied that to the folder, which is totally cool. It applied it then to everything that's in that folder, but I can turn off all of the effects. So if there was multiple effects in there, I could turn them all off by toggling the eyeball on the effects, or I can just turn off the one gradient overlay one and turn it back on. So before we touched this, that's what it looked like. Now it's got, I think, a little bit more richer color saturation, and I kind of like it, so I'll keep that. Let's see if there's anything else about layers we want to talk about. Oh yes, adjustment layers. Okay, so back into here. So adjustment layers can be found down here. So let me think about which one might be a good one to show you. Um, Maybe the wolf. Oh, it does have an adjustment layer already applied to it. So this wolf has an adjustment layer of curves, so I can toggle that on and off. Um, if I click on this, I should be able to see those properties somewhere. I might be in the wrong workspace. Um, yeah, so there's my curves layer, and I'm going to move some of these panels out of the way so you can see what I'm talking about. All right, we are on wolf, and here's my curves adjustment layer. And these are the properties. So if I take this point and make it more extreme, you can see how it's adjusting the image. I'm going to undo that and leave that one the way it is. And maybe let's try one of the other ones. So I'll choose brightness contrast is actually used to be horrible in Photoshop, but now it's quite good. So you can adjust the brightness of an image and the contrast of it. So we've really made that wolf stand out there. And then like all other layers, I can turn it off to see what it looked like before and after. And if I like it, but I think it's too much, I can also just adjust the opacity of my adjustment layer. I'm going to go back to this mountains thing and do uh, a selective color adjustment layer. So this layer, I want this floating because there's a lot of layers that we want to look at. So this selective color is right above the background mountains image. So I'm going to take these and adjust the red. I'll pull the magenta all the way down. You can see that everything that's on that background layer just got a lot less red. If I pull down the yellow too, we can see that see how it changes, maybe bump up the blue in it, cyan in it, but that's only affecting the reds in this image. There happened to be a lot that sort of did have like this pinkish tone to it, so um, that's about what it looked like before. So red was a good one to choose, but you can also pick out these main colors or just do it in neutral. So now if I pull down the magenta in the neutrals, you can see it drastically changes the color and bump up the yellow. You also have relative and absolute options here, and so I don't like that, but I liked kind of what I did with the red, so I'm gonna just do that again. I went back too far, so new, and selective color is the last one there, and I'm going to go back to reds and pull down the magenta and the yellow, maybe bump up that cyan so it's more of a blue tint to it, maybe some black. See the difference between absolute and relative? Those are just two, I think, that you need to play with. I think I might like that one better. And yeah, and that's done. I can turn that off and on to see the difference. And like everything else, I can change the opacity of that. So those are the layer properties and features that you can work with in Photoshop that are part of the assignment. So good luck.